In the gray haze of early morning, Clara trudged through the frost-kissed streets of her small town, a thermos of hot coffee tucked under her arm and a paper bag with a warm muffin cradled in her hands. Her destination was the alley behind the old bookstore, where Tom, a weathered man with a tattered coat and a quiet demeanor, often sat against the brick wall. For months, Clara had made this ritual part of her routine, leaving small offerings, a sandwich, a pair of gloves, a handwritten note with words like, "You are enough," or "Today is a new day." Tom rarely spoke, but his eyes, clouded with some unspoken grief, softened each time she approached. To Clara, these gestures were as natural as breathing, a way to acknowledge the humanity in a man others passed without a glance. At the community center where Clara worked as a receptionist, her colleagues noticed her absences during breaks and began to whisper, "Why waste your time on that guy?" Her coworker Jen sneered one afternoon, tossing her hair as she leaned over the front desk. "He's just a bum who chooses to live like that. You're throwing your money away." Others chimed in, their words sharp with judgment, naive, foolish, enabling. Even Clara's friend Mia, usually kind, raised an eyebrow. "You're too soft, Clara. People like him don't change. You're just making yourself a target." Clara would smile faintly, shrug, and change the subject, but their words stung. She didn't see a bum or a nuisance. She saw a man who carried a weight she couldn't name but felt compelled to ease. Tom, for his part, was a mystery. He never begged, never asked for anything, and kept his past locked behind a wall of silence. Clara noticed details others overlooked, the way his hands trembled not from cold but from some deeper ache, or how he'd traced the edge of her notes with a calloused finger, as if memorizing them. Once, she'd seen him pull a faded photograph from his pocket, staring at it with a grief so raw it made her turn away. She never pried, sensing his story was his to keep, but she wondered who he'd been before the alley became his home. The turning point came during the town's annual winter gala, a glitzy event where the community center staff were celebrated for their work. Clara, who'd organized much of the event, was set to receive a modest award for her dedication. The auditorium buzzed with chatter, fairy lights twinkling overhead as townsfolk in their finest mingled. Jen and her clique hovered near the punch table, their laughter sharp as they recounted Clara's pointless charity. Clara, in a simple navy dress, stood at the edge of the room, her thoughts drifting to Tom. She'd left him a scarf and a thermos that morning, wondering if he'd be warm enough in the bitter cold. As the ceremony began, the mayor took the stage, praising the center's efforts. Clara's name was called, and she stepped forward, cheeks flushed, to accept her plaque. But before she could speak, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads turned toward the back of the auditorium, where a group of strangers had entered, men and women in crisp military uniforms, their faces solemn yet proud. At their center stood Tom, transformed. His coat was gone, replaced by a pressed suit, his hair neatly combed, though his eyes still carried that familiar weight. The room fell silent, the air thick with confusion. One of the newcomers, a woman with a silver braid and a chest full of medals, stepped forward. "We're here to honor Colonel Thomas Hargrove," she said, her voice clear and commanding. "A war hero who saved countless lives, including mine, during a mission no one expected to survive." She recounted Tom's past, a decorated officer who'd led his unit through a brutal ambush, sacrificing his own safety to ensure their survival. After the war, loss and trauma had driven him to retreat from the world, hiding his medals and his name in the shadows of shame and grief. The audience, including Jen and her friends, sat frozen, their earlier mockery now a bitter memory. The woman turned to Clara, her gaze softening. "We found Colonel Hargrove because of you," she said. "Your kindness, those notes, those small gestures, gave him the strength to face his past. He told us how you saw him, not as a stranger, but as a person. You reminded him he was worth saving." Tears welled in Clara's eyes as the group saluted Tom, who stood tall yet visibly shaken, his hand clutching one of Clara's notes, now tucked in his pocket. The crowd erupted in applause, but for Clara, the world narrowed to Tom's quiet nod of gratitude, a silent acknowledgement of the bridge her kindness had built. Jen and the others approached Clara later, their faces flushed with shame. "We didn't know," Jen stammered, her voice small. "We thought." "I'm sorry." Clara only smiled, her heart too full for anger. Tom, surrounded by his old comrades, began to reconnect, sharing stories of his past with a tentative hope. The gala became more than a celebration of the center. It was a testament to the ripple effect of compassion. In the weeks that followed, Tom moved into a small apartment, supported by his unit and the community, who now saw him through new eyes. Clara's colleagues, inspired by her example, began their own small acts of kindness, bringing meals to shelters, writing notes of encouragement, listening to those they'd once ignored. Clara continued her morning walks, though the alley was empty now. She found new recipients for her quiet gifts: a tired mother at the bus stop, a lonely teenager at the park, each act a seed planted in the hope it might grow. Tom visited her one day, the photograph from his pocket now framed on his table. It was of his late wife, he explained, whose loss had broken him. "Your notes," he said, his voice steady for the first time, "they reminded me she'd want me to live again." Clara hugged him, tears falling, knowing her small gestures had not just warmed a body but rekindled a soul. The town never forgot that night at the gala. It became a story passed down, a reminder that heroes can hide in plain sight and that kindness, however small, can unravel the hardest knots of pain. Clara's heart swelled each time she heard it, not from pride, but from the knowledge that seeing the humanity in one person could change the world for many. And in the quiet moments, when she pinned her next note or packed another muffin, she felt the weight of that truth, as warm and certain as the dawn.